All right, looks like we are live. Apologize, a couple minutes late. Was having some technical difficulties trying to go live on Instagram again, and was fixing the microphone. Was having some volume issues. So if you're having any issues hearing me, just put that in the comments. One of the new updates that Facebook groups actually have is that you can no longer use a third-party app in order to go live inside of a group. So you'll now not see this in Builders of Authority, which is where we had been doing a lot of this stuff, which is honestly kind of good because we were struggling with people leaving comments and things like that, but we weren't able to see their names. So now that issue has been fixed for one way or another. But really, really excited about today's training that I'm going to do with you all. I am going to be sharing my screen and going over a couple of different things. We're going to talk about how to find podcast guesting opportunities. And so I'm just going to go through a variety of the different ways in which I've done so. Want to do a quick reminder that, again, we are doing these live trainings every single Tuesday at 3 o'clock Central. You'll find it live on my Facebook. We're also live on LinkedIn. We're live on Instagram. We're live on my YouTube channel as well. So in a couple of different places. In addition to that, we do have our Thursday lives that we're doing now as well, which are more so guest style interviews. We had our first one last week with Jose Bolaños. It went awesome. This Thursday, we have a guy by the name of Nathan Keller, who is not in our BOA community, but provides a lot of support to people that are in our community. So super excited to dive in that. That's going to be an awesome conversation around sales and AI and some technology that he's working on that I'm super excited to share with you all. If you're interested, whether you're in our Builders of Authority mastermind community, or you feel as if you would be able to provide a lot of value to entrepreneurs, to business owners that are looking to build both their personal brand and business, make sure you reach out to me. Let's get you on the schedule. It is a first come, first serve to our BOA members. We do have our BOA community right now at 50% off, available for the next 5 people. So you'll see a link in the comments. That's $250 for a month, or $2,500 for a year. You'll see below a little bit about what's included, but you get a 30-minute onboarding call with Lorna, who's my executive assistant. You get access to our personal branding course, which sells at over $1,000, access to our private Facebook group with about 45 members in there, 2 weekly calls on Monday and Wednesday at 2 o'clock Central Time. Monday's calls are primarily related to office hour style calls where you can come and ask questions to both myself and the rest of the community. And then on Wednesday, we do a little bit smaller of a group training. So we'll take, for example, this training that I go over today, and we'll diagnose some things and dive deeper with each individual member, do some Q&A, things like that. So if you're interested in joining, want to take advantage of the special offer that we have going now, act now before it goes back up. Send me any questions. Send me a message with any questions or details that you might have. And then don't forget about our BOA live event happening here in St. Louis on Wednesday, June 26th. We do have pre-sale tickets going for 7 more days now. So that is at buildauthority.co/event, but you can also find the link in this comment section below. As I do these trainings, they're typically anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Please, please, please put your questions in the comment section so that way I can see them and answer them in real time. This is an opportunity where we get together once a week. A lot of people send me message in the DMs. They go to the Builders of Authority group. They want their questions answered. So this is a perfect spot if you have questions on this particular topic or training, or you just have generalized personal branding questions. Please also, go ahead and put those in the comments, and I'm more than happy to tackle those. So today's training is going to be finding and getting more opportunities as a podcast guest. So this is a question that has been brought up time and time again by both members in our private mastermind community, as well as in our free Builders of Authority group. So it's a hot topic. Obviously, a lot of people are starting podcasts. There's a ton of podcasts that are out there, and people are wanting to know, hey, if I grow my brand, part of that is obviously more people knowing me. A great way for more people to know who you are like you as an individual and what you do, and more importantly, trust you, is an authoritative piece or an authoritative guest appearance on someone else's podcast. And so at my peak, over the past couple of years, I was doing as many as 25 podcasts per quarter. That used to be a quarterly rock of mine in the agency, because anytime I was on more podcasts, usually, as long as they were the right podcasts, my brand was growing, but more importantly, the exposure of our businesses were growing as well. And so it's great from that aspect. It's also a great content creation aspect. So a lot of the podcasts that are out there, depending upon whose podcast you're on, they usually have a live video component, whether you go physically and do a podcast in person, or you do it over Zoom or Riverside or any of those things. They usually then put that up on like YouTube, for example. Well, if the podcast ends up creating some clips for you, that's obviously great. The host, the team, etc. We do some of that for the people that hop on our podcast. But you can also take your or the YouTube video that's out there and use a tool. We use Opus right now, Opus Clip Pro or Opus Pro. And we will literally take the YouTube video and then go plug it into Opus, and it creates, 10, 15, 20, sometimes even 30 clips. And you can also go like manually edit certain sections. It'll add all the cool captions and emojis and B-roll if you want it to. But that's a great way to create more content as well. And then to repurpose, obviously being a guest on somebody's podcast, and that's evergreen stuff. So a lot of reasons, obviously, why you would want to be a guest on someone else's podcast. Now, depending upon like where you're at in your personal branding or brand building journey for your business, podcasting as a guest is either going to be more relevant and more advantageous for you at certain times versus others. Obviously, the big aspect that goes into it is time to not only do the podcast, but time to make sure that the podcast that you're going to be on is a podcast that's worthwhile. Recently, I've scaled back from those 25 per quarter to more to like 10 to 15 a quarter. I'm doing a little bit more in this season as I'm promoting Builders of Authority, as I'm promoting our mastermind and our event. I didn't do a whole lot in Q1. But as with anything in life, I have really found that it is about the quality of these opportunities way more than it is about the quantity. Obviously, but in the beginning, you need to build that repetition and your reputation in order to get better. And then quality, of course, comes with that. But quantity is good in the beginning as well. So I don't want to tell you, hey, shoot for X, right? You have to kind of come up with that number on your own based on your time, based on where you're at in business. But like if I was struggling to get more clients and grow my business, I would be hopping on a ton of different podcasting opportunities just to build the repetition again, especially if you're not great at speaking in front of people. If you're not great on camera, a lot of times people ask me, Adam, are you still nervous speaking in front of a bunch of people? I'm in that season where for whatever reason, I still do get nervous. Although I'm better at speaking on stage, that still is a little bit nerve-wracking to me. No different than when I first started being a guest on podcasts almost 4 years ago. The first 100 podcasts that I did, I still had a little bit of nerves right around it. I was still a little bit nervous. I still had a little bit of like self-confusion of like, is this worth hopping on this podcast? Do I have anything that's actually worth sharing on the podcast? Like all of those different things were rolling through my mind. And as I go on bigger podcasts, now some of those nerves continues to start to like creep in a little bit. But I want to go over some of the main opportunities that I've utilized in order to get opportunities to be on other people's podcasts, right? So the first thing I would be doing if I was looking to get on more podcasts, and I don't really care what season of life or business that you're in. I've seen even some of the biggest names. Like I got a couple of people that are coming on my podcast soon that I would have loved to have gotten on my podcast. I just assumed it would be a little bit more difficult. And I didn't want to just like reach out with a cold DM and be like, hey, come on my podcast. But they're in that season where they're like, hey, I'm looking to do some more podcasts over the next quarter, over the next month. I have some availability. Let me know if you have a podcast that would be making of sense for me to come on it. So even people that are way ahead of me are still doing that as an outreach. And that's what I will do from time to time. And I did it a lot in the beginning is, hey, who has a podcast that I could benefit from being on? Like, who can I benefit the audience for, right? And so I would be doing that on my public pages, my public Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever. I would also be going in like private communities. So if you're interested in being a guest on podcast, Builders of Authority public Facebook group is a great place, for example, to be like, hey, here's what I do. Here's how I can provide value. Here's maybe some other podcasts that I've been on. Who has a podcast that would make sense for me to hop on? It's a great way to do it. If you're in any like paid mastermind communities, again, a great place to be able to connect with people, create some content and provide a ton of value and get value out of it. So I would definitely recommend doing that as well over the course of trying to promote getting on more podcasts. Then I would do is I would take each individual podcast opportunity. So let's say I have podcasts from Kim. I'm on Kim's podcast. After I'm a guest on Kim's podcast and I provide value and I do my thing and Kim's like, Adam, you were an incredible guest, blah, 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 blah. I'm then asking Kim, hey, I really appreciate that feedback. I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I'm looking forward to it coming out, supporting it, sharing it, leaving a review for your podcast. That's a huge, huge value add when you go out and leave a review for anybody's podcast that you've been on. I'm saying, Kim, who are, 3 or 4, maybe, or even just 2 other people that are in your network, Kim, that would be of benefit of having me on their podcast? Sometimes they might say, no, let me think about it. But the likelihood is that they're going to come back and they're like, hey, I actually have a couple people that I want to connect you with after this. Let me connect you with them. And I think, you would be a fabulous guest, and I'll let them know you were just on my podcast. So then you're growing your network and podcasting opportunities by tapping into other people's network that you've already provided value to. And they're basically social proofing and giving their stamp of approval for you as a guest. So those are like the 2 main ways that I've done and I've utilized and I've continued to grow my podcasting opportunities. Opportunity number 3 is obviously people reaching out to me because of the brand I've built, or they've heard me on somebody else's podcast, or we're connected into a community. And they're like, hey, Adam, will you be a guest on my podcast? So that's obviously like the easiest opportunity where somebody's reaching out to you and being like, hey, I want you on my podcast. Now, quick disclaimer with all of these things, and as you continue to build and grow your brand, you are going to have more opportunities than you would have ever imagined to be a podcast guest. You are going to want to turn a lot of these down at scale. It's not going to make sense. It's not going to be worth your time. And as people are growing their podcast, they're a lot of times just looking for someone with your caliber in order to do it. Not to say you can't provide value and that you can't give back, because I do that from time to time. Like there's some people in our BOA mastermind community that they're just getting started with their podcast. I'm like, hey, Adam, can I have you on my podcast? Well, if it was a random person off the street just getting started, I'm probably not going to take that opportunity. But somebody that's been providing value in my community is a client of mine. I'm going to bend over backwards to help them grow their brand. So of course, in that instance, I'd be willing to do it. Now, there's quite a few people in my community right now, both in our free and our paid group, that are testing out platforms like Podmatch or some equivalents to Podmatch that are out there. So if you're not familiar with Podmatch, I was looking at it today. It's like $6 a month. That is a great platform to go outside of those first three things. So the first three things we touched on was your existing network, turning each individual podcast guest opportunity that you have into 2, 3, 4, and more. Building a brand where people are reaching out to you and being like, hey, Adam, will you come be a guest on my podcast? If you're looking to tap outside of that, or you've already done a lot of podcasts with people that you already know in your ecosystem, something like a pod match is very, very valuable. Again, I think it's $6 a month. I didn't sign back up. Luke just said Podmatch is great. I know he's been one of the people that have utilized it. I've utilized it in the past and it's worked awesome. Do beware, it will start to come in, especially as you have a brand built and all these different things. It will start to come in waves, which is a good thing. You can also sign up if you have your own podcast. You can also sign up to be a host on there and people pitch to be on your show as well. So Luke says $24 a month, I believe. So I think there's two different plans. I think there's a basic plan, and then there's also a more of a premier plan. I know I think I paid like $6 a month when I did it last time. Maybe it was closer to 15. I can't really remember, but I know there's two different plans that are out there right now. Regardless, even if it was $24 a month or whatever it is, there's a lot of value in having it out there, right? Again, you just need to be very, very selective, especially at that, because there's going to be no shortage of opportunities. And most of those, you do have to take the time to fill out every single questionnaire, to do some, maybe even like reach outs or write some stuff about like how that podcast resonates with you in some sort of aspect. So you usually can't just go and like mass do like 50 different podcasts that you're looking to get on. So before I go any further, if there's any questions or anything like that, feel free to leave those in the comments. The next aspect I wanted to touch on, and I was trying to find a past email on it because I used to use it all of the time. But it was a guy by the name of Josh Elledge in Up My Influence. So if you are looking for a booking agency, for example, you don't have to pay for this service at all, but you can subscribe to like the newsletter. Let me share my screen here and just go over this. So for example, like I was signing up for these emails and he was sending out a list of people that I'm assuming are like his clients, right? And these are some podcasts that I would sign up, and they were usually really, really high quality podcasts. Most of these were. So you can literally see, for example, like who they're seeking guests on. You can click the link and go start booking directly. So you can sign up to booking agencies like client lists, right? And they will send out these emails usually on like a weekly or monthly basis. A couple of these podcasts I was actually on as well. A great place to be able to do that. So again, if you're looking and struggling to find podcasts, right, that's a great place to be able to do that as well. So Lee has a question. What is the most memorable podcast question a podcast interest form has asked you as a potential guest? That is a really great question. I think one of the most memorable ones was it was a podcast about failure. And it was asking what one of my biggest failures was, both personally and professionally. Most of the podcast interest forms I've received have not been super, super creative. And I don't have a super creative one either. So I think it's a great idea. It sparks great conversation. But I think of all the ones that I can remember, I think that was like the most memorable one, which is pretty memorable, of course. Like everybody, obviously, like in my mind, wants to talk about success. But this was a podcast specifically about failure, both personally and professionally, which was a little bit of an interesting twist on things. And so the last piece I want to talk about here real quick is scraping the internet, which is something that I'm now starting to get very, very strategic about new and different opportunities and starting to do some of this stuff myself and with my team. But I get pitched a lot of times in email of people reaching out and being like, hey, Adam, I am on behalf of X, Y, and Z, or it is X, Y, and Z person. Here's a little bit about this individual, and we believe he would be a great or she be a great guest for your podcast, or if they are the ones doing it, I would be a great guest for your podcast. Please let me know what next steps look like that. I'm probably getting 1 or 2 of those a day now, a couple of years into the podcast, really probably over the last 3 to 6 months. But if I was like literally just focused, for example, on doing this, and again, I haven't done a whole lot of this, so I'm just going to kind of like do it in real time. And if hopefully, I'm hoping it works, just showing you what I'm talking about here. But this is how I would probably be doing all of this stuff on my own, for example. So if I was taking a look, and I apologize, I have a bunch of different tabs open, but if I was looking for an opportunity, for example, and I went in and I typed in business, right? So let's just say I typed in business and I took a look at these different opportunities. I see all these different podcasts, right? And you can go in and search, hey, what are the most downloaded podcasts and top rated podcasts, et cetera. And you'll get a whole freaking list of all of this stuff. But you could literally come to example, like if you were wanting to be on the Female Feminist podcast, you could go here, you click on this stuff. When you scroll down, you're able to see the website of the podcast. So you can literally go over here, and I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to share the screen of that tab. But I could literally go here, for example, and then I could go and I could see, okay, she's got all this different stuff. See here, Vegas has got information about the podcast, and this is where it's a little bit time intensive, right? But like if you're wanting to get on a really, really large podcast that you're like, hey, I could provide value talking about this, take a look down here at the contact. Looks like they have something about podcasts. I want to be a guest on the Female Feminist podcast. I think my client would be a great fit, or myself, right? So this is where I could literally go fill out the form. If I also wanted to have Tori on my podcast, for example, she's got a podcast manager, I could fill out this form. So you can literally, well, it looks like the form might be down, or my internet's super, super slow. Looks like it was my internet. But you can literally fill out this information and start to build relationships and get opportunities that way. So that's the way of like, if you're like, hey, I'm really, really, maybe not necessarily capped out, but I am trying to get super, super strategic where I'm like, I want a top podcast and I want to be that guest. And I want to make sure if I'm only going to do 5 podcasts a month or 5 podcasts a quarter, that they are going to be the most dialed in podcasts that I do. This is a great way to do that. So I would encourage you, again, to, depending upon where you're at, you might be in the, hey, I need repetition stage. Go get, and again, some people might be indifferent about this or have a different opinion. I'm just talking through my experience, right? I went and got on a bunch of different podcasts. I've been on over 200 podcasts over the last couple of years, just getting repetitions in, becoming a better speaker, getting like a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, dialing in my message, answering every which freaking question on a podcast that you can almost probably think of, right? And so now when I get on like the podcast that I'm like, man, this is a big stage, or I'm doing it in person, I'm a lot more focused and I'm a lot more seasoned when it comes to that. Or you might be like, hey, I'm only doing a couple, but like I got a bunch of people reaching out right now, having them or wanting me to be a guest on their podcast. Like I don't need any more opportunities. Or you might be like, wow, like I'm in a little bit of a season of both, or I just need to do my research to make sure I'm on like the best possible podcast. If I'm going to do 1 podcast a week or 1 podcast a month, whatever that might be, I need to make sure it's the best freaking possible podcast. So those are just some of the strategies, again, that I've utilized. Hopefully you got something from this training that can kind of help you figure out, dial in where you're at. But podcasting is, as a guest, one of the best ways to get your name, your brand, build your authority, to have content come back from the video and audio versions of those episodes that are out there, so you don't have a content creation problem, right? It's allowing you the opportunity to build relationships. I've hopped on as a guest of people's podcasts, and I've either hired them at some point, I've been able to work directly with them. So people had me on their podcast, whether it was the digital marketing agency or Builders of Authority. They've asked what I've done and been like, wow, that's super interesting. I want to buy from you. So again, that's more of a strategic move of me being like, yeah, I think I could provide value, but I might even be able to do business with this person. Now I'm not going in trying to pitch my stuff. Or their audiences, right? I know they cater to X, Y, and Z audience. I can provide value in this podcast episode and then connect with them offline. But I can absolutely get them into my ecosystem and have them buy something from me. But more importantly, I want that relationship, and I want to then go capitalize on those opportunities. I want to turn that one podcast episode with Lee and Luke into 3, 4, 5 more, because I really, really vibed with them. It was a great episode, and I know they have more people that have podcasts in their network. So that's the psychology. That's the whole process around all this stuff. Again, hope you got some value from this today. If you have any questions, feedback, things like that, drop it in the comments, drop it in our Builders of Authority Facebook group, and we'll see you here on Thursday with another live. I'll actually be doing a live recording this afternoon of our Builders of Authority podcast. First time I've ever done it live on social media, but we have a really special announcement with the speaking event that I'm speaking at here in June. So that's why I'm doing it. So you'll see me here in about 30 minutes going live again.